In the world we live in today, we often find ourselves divided politically, socially, and ideologically. But what happens when a public figure, someone whose name is synonymous with greatness, is rejected in a small-town diner simply because of his beliefs? You might expect anger, outrage, or even a viral post calling for a boycott. But Michael Jordan's response to being denied service was nothing like anyone could have predicted. Michael Jordan is denied service at the diner. It was one of those crisp fall evenings where the world seemed to be in perfect harmony. A quiet, almost timeless feeling hung in the air. Michael Jordan, a man whose name reverberates through history for his achievements on the basketball court, found himself just another customer on a lonely road looking for a warm meal at the Maple Grove Diner. After all, even legends need a quiet moment to themselves, a chance to sit back and reflect on life's complexities in solitude. The diner stood like a small beacon of comfort in the rural town of Oakwood, its neon open sign flickering in the dimming evening light, inviting all who passed to step inside and experience its simple pleasures: hot coffee, freshly baked pies, and meals that reminded people of home. The rain from earlier in the day had left puddles on the parking lot, and as Michael's car came to a slow stop, the soft glow of the diner's lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting an inviting hue. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and by now his stomach growled loudly, demanding something more substantial than the quick bites he'd had on the go. He parked his car and stepped out, feeling the cool evening air greet him like an old friend. The bell above the door jingled as he entered the diner. The familiar, comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee and frying potatoes filled the space, mingling with the soft hum of country music playing in the background. The sound of clinking silverware and casual conversation filled the air, making the place feel like an oasis of calm. Michael chose a small booth by the window. It was the perfect spot to watch the rain, now only a faint drizzle, as it settled into a peaceful rhythm. He grabbed the plastic menu from the table, and as he scanned the options, nostalgia washed over him. The special that day was meatloaf with mashed potatoes, a dish that reminded him of colder nights spent in the warmth of his grandmother's kitchen. The very thought of it brought a small smile to his face as he imagined how comforting a good home-cooked meal would feel after a long, taxing day. Lily, the waitress with curly brown hair tied into a ponytail, approached his table with a smile, balancing 3 plates on her arm. "Hi there, welcome to Maple Grove. Can I start you off with some coffee?" Her voice was warm, and her friendly demeanor immediately made Michael feel at ease. "Yes, thank you, that sounds perfect," he replied, returning the smile. As Lily moved toward the coffee pot to pour his drink, Michael's mind drifted for a moment. He thought about how often he had to be in the public eye, surrounded by people who either admired or criticized him for his accomplishments. But this moment of simple humanity, felt different. He was just a person, a man seeking some comfort in a place that seemed untouched by the noise of the world. Little did he know, this small moment of peace was about to be shattered. From the kitchen, another woman emerged. She wore an apron that read Melissa, and her presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. Her eyes locked with Michael's, and there was a brief moment of recognition, but it wasn't one of familiarity or admiration. It was a moment filled with hesitation, judgment, and an unspoken tension that immediately made Michael aware that something was wrong. "Hey, Lily," Melissa called sharply, her voice tight as if struggling to make a decision. "Come here for a minute." Lily, who had been on her way to serve a coffee, looked puzzled but approached her boss anyway. Michael watched as the 2 women spoke in hushed tones near the cash register. Their body language was full of discomfort. Melissa's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her face flushed, while Lily shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, glancing over at Michael every few seconds. Michael's stomach tightened as he realized that something was unfolding that he couldn't quite comprehend. He had walked into this diner seeking a quiet meal, but it seemed that he had become a source of unspoken tension. After a few moments, Melissa walked directly to his table, her footsteps deliberate, her eyes focused and unyielding. When she spoke, her voice was firm, yet tinged with something Michael couldn't quite place. "I'm sorry," she began, her words cold yet composed. "I know who you are, Mr. Jordan, and I don't feel comfortable serving someone like you here." Michael's eyebrows furrowed in confusion, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "This is my restaurant," she added, crossing her arms, "and I have the right to decide who I serve. I don't believe in the same things you do, and I'm not going to put my customers in a position where they have to feel uncomfortable because of your beliefs." The room grew still. Every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward Michael, and he could feel the weight of the silence settle heavily on his shoulders. It was as if the very air had thickened, and all he could hear was the quiet rustling of the leaves outside and the low hum of the fluorescent lights. The once familiar smells of coffee and food seemed to fade into the background, and for a brief moment the only thing Michael could focus on was Melissa's words, cutting through the calm like a jagged knife. In that moment, every instinct within him screamed to respond. He could feel the heat rising in his face, his chest tightening with the urge to argue, to remind her that businesses weren't supposed to reject customers based on personal beliefs. He could feel the stirrings of anger, the impulse to fight back, to defend his right to be treated like anyone else. But something held him back. Instead of lashing out, Michael took a deep breath, allowing the silence to settle around him. He folded the menu slowly, placing it back into its holder. There was a quiet strength in his movements, a subtle power in choosing to remain calm in the face of rejection. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice steady yet filled with the weight of the moment. "It's your business. You're entitled to make your own choices." He slid out of the booth, the noise in the diner around him growing louder as he stood. His gaze met Melissa's once more, and he nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty," he added, his voice calm and measured. "I'll be on my way." As he walked toward the door, he felt the eyes of every customer on him. But instead of anger or bitterness, there was only an overwhelming sense of resignation. The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped outside, the cool evening air feeling much sharper now. He stood there for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel of his car, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his chest. He had faced rejection before in many forms, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the food or the politics, it was about something deeper, something human. He had been dismissed, rejected not for who he was, but for what he represented. And yet, instead of responding with outrage, Michael Jordan had chosen something far more powerful. He had chosen to walk away, not in defeat, but with quiet dignity. And as he sat in his car, staring at the diner through the windshield, a small but significant thought flickered in his mind. This wasn't the end of the story. Michael's unexpected response. As Michael Jordan sat behind the wheel of his car, the engine idling in the stillness of the evening, a quiet calm washed over him. The anger he expected to feel was absent. Instead, a peculiar sense of clarity filled the space inside his mind. He had just been denied service at a diner, not because of his character or any past actions, but simply because of his political beliefs. The sudden rejection was sharp, cutting through the calm of the evening like a jolt of electricity. Yet, as he looked back at the Maple Grove diner through the rearview mirror, something inside him shifted. This wasn't how he envisioned the situation playing out. In a world that seemed more and more divided, where a simple disagreement could quickly escalate into a public war, he had expected to leave the diner with a sense of frustration, anger, and perhaps even the desire for revenge. But what he had found in himself instead was a quiet understanding, a reminder that the world didn't need more conflict, but rather more kindness. It would have been easy to pick up his phone, take to social media, and lash out at the diner and its owner, Melissa. The outrage would have spread quickly. Hashtags, shared posts, and the collective voice of his followers could have easily condemned the small business and ignited a storm of backlash. He could have called for a boycott of the diner, warning others not to frequent a place that had rejected him on the basis of his beliefs. The internet, after all, had long been a platform where conflict and division thrived, where every disagreement could be amplified into a viral spectacle. But Michael Jordan wasn't just another person in a sea of angry voices. His name carried weight, not just because of his athletic achievements, but because of the persona he had built over decades. A man who rose above the noise, who navigated the pressures of fame and public life with a steady resolve. He understood better than most the power of his words and actions, and in this moment, he realized that the world needed something different, something unexpected. Instead of lashing out, Michael did something no one could have predicted. He pulled out his phone, not to write a fiery post calling for retribution, but to make a phone call. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number of someone he trusted, someone who had always provided him with guidance when he needed it most. The familiar ringtone echoed in the car, the anticipation growing in his chest as he waited for the call to connect. When the phone finally rang, a voice on the other end greeted him warmly. "Hey, Michael, what's going on?" Michael hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Remember that conversation we had last month?" he asked, his voice steady. "I think I've found the perfect place." There was a pause, and then the voice responded, intrigued but cautious. "What do you mean?" Michael smiled slightly, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. He could feel the tension slowly leaving his body, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. "I think it's time to do something that will surprise everyone," he said, his voice filled with determination. Without waiting for a response, Michael ended the call, feeling a sense of satisfaction. He wasn't angry anymore. In fact, he felt something even stronger. Hope. A sense of resolve had taken root in his chest, the kind of hope that could only come from choosing a path of peace and understanding over conflict. He realized that his response to Melissa's rejection wasn't going to be the usual outrage or retaliation. It was going to be an act of kindness, something that would not only affect Melissa but would ripple out into the community, changing the very nature of the situation. The idea was simple, yet powerful. Instead of choosing the path of condemnation, Michael Jordan would use his influence to do something that would uplift the diner, turning a negative moment into something positive. He would reach out to his followers, not to stir anger, but to encourage them to make their own decisions, to visit the diner for themselves and see what it had to offer. It wasn't a call for a boycott. It wasn't an attempt to make Melissa look bad. It was a message of understanding, a reminder that kindness and forgiveness were the keys to breaking through the divides that often seemed insurmountable. Michael's decision wasn't born out of naivety or weakness. It was a conscious choice to rise above the bitterness and conflict that so often defined public discourse. He knew that by acting with grace, by responding to rejection not with bitterness but with understanding, he could change the narrative. It wasn't about letting someone off the hook for their actions, but about showing them a better way, one that focused on healing and unity instead of division. As Michael sat in his car, he couldn't help but reflect on the larger implications of his actions. In a world where everything seemed to be a battle, where every disagreement felt like it could escalate into something far worse, his decision was a small act of rebellion in itself. It was a refusal to be swept up in the tide of anger and outrage. It was a quiet stand for something more: understanding, compassion, and the belief that the way forward was not through confrontation, but through kindness. Michael started the car, the engine humming to life as he pulled away from the parking lot. The headlights cut through the night, and as he drove down the road, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him all evening. The world would have expected him to be angry, to call for retribution, but instead he had chosen a different path, one that not only surprised Melissa, but would soon surprise everyone else. A crowd gathers outside the diner. The following morning, the Maple Grove Diner had barely opened its doors before something unexpected began to unfold. As the sun began to stretch its first golden rays across the small town of Oakwood, Talia, the young waitress, shuffled her way down Main Street, her mind still preoccupied with the events of the previous evening. She had never expected something so simple as serving a meal would leave such an indelible mark on her day, let alone her life. She thought about Michael Jordan as she walked, reflecting on the moment he had left the diner. His calm response had thrown her off balance. She had been prepared for a scene, for anger, or for him to retaliate, but instead, he had simply walked away with quiet dignity. She wondered, as she always did, if she would have had the strength to remain that composed in the face of rejection. But beyond that, something lingered, a strange, gnawing curiosity about what might come next. When Talia arrived at the diner, the first sign that something was different was the crowd. From a distance, she saw the line of people standing outside, chatting with one another, laughing and sipping coffee from the nearby gas station. She paused in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. The parking lot, usually empty at this early hour, was now almost completely full. The unexpected nature of it made her feel as though the world had somehow shifted overnight, but she couldn't yet place why. "What's going on?" Talia muttered to herself, the confusion thick in her voice. She approached the front door and pushed it open, the bell above jingling as she entered. The diner's interior, usually quiet and calm at this hour, was now alive with a strange energy. People were everywhere, some seated at tables, others standing in line, waiting for their chance to sit. A few more trickled in behind her, the diner's space quickly filling to its capacity. Outside, the line of customers continued to grow, wrapping around the building. People of all ages stood, chatting eagerly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and excitement. As Talia maneuvered through the crowd, she overheard snippets of conversations, each one punctuated with the same question. "Did you hear what happened?" "What's all this about anyway?" someone asked as they handed Talia a coffee cup. Talia was too disoriented to answer. Her feet felt as though they were moving on autopilot, and she couldn't help but feel a strange tension coiling in her stomach. She had no idea what had prompted this sudden influx of customers. She didn't recognize a single face from the line outside, but the energy was undeniable. There was something big happening. Talia pushed her way to the front and opened the door to find a group of news vans parked just outside. The reporters had arrived. A tall man with styled hair and a microphone in hand approached Talia as soon as she stepped into the doorway. "Excuse me, Camden Walsh, Channel 8 News. Can I get a statement about the viral post?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "What viral post?" Talia asked, still grappling with the situation, her mind racing. She fumbled for the keys in her pocket, the clinking of metal a sharp sound against the hum of the growing crowd. "The one from Michael Jordan," the reporter pressed almost too eagerly. "It's all over social media. He posted about your diner." Talia stood frozen, her heart racing. Michael Jordan's name echoed in her mind. She had heard of the post, a message that had taken on a life of its own, but she hadn't realized just how far-reaching it had become. In that moment, it hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. Michael had done something far bigger than simply walk away. The realization came quickly. The post wasn't just about the rejection or even Michael himself. It was about the message behind his actions and how it resonated with people. The post had captured the imagination of not just Oakwood, but the whole country. Michael Jordan wasn't a politician or an influencer seeking to make a statement for political gain. No, he had used his influence to show that, even in moments of division, kindness could break through. By simply encouraging people to visit the diner, despite the rejection he had faced, he had inadvertently made it a symbol for something greater, a symbol of reconciliation, understanding, and grace. Talia looked around and her heart sank. The line outside seemed endless, the number of people flooding into the diner almost overwhelming. The news vans had cameras rolling, reporters darting between tables, and the once quiet space was now a cacophony of activity. Maple Grove Diner, a small establishment in a quiet town, was now the center of national attention, all because of Michael Jordan's unexpected act of kindness. The realization weighed on her. People weren't just here to see a small diner or try its food. They were here to be part of something bigger. The message that Michael had shared wasn't just about the diner's food, but about the need to stand up for local businesses, to support each other in the face of adversity, and above all, to choose understanding over division. Talia stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the sight before her. Her eyes caught the faces of the customers seated at the tables, their conversations buzzing with excitement. They weren't just enjoying a meal. They were celebrating a moment of unity, a moment where kindness had overcome conflict, where a simple act of forgiveness had made all the difference. As the first waves of customers trickled in, Talia's mind raced. The diner had gone from a quiet place, almost unnoticed in the quiet town of Oakwood, to a beacon of something much larger. Michael Jordan had set something into motion, and it was bigger than anything the town had experienced. The people who had gathered here weren't just curious about the food or the story. They had come because they believed in the power of kindness, of choosing peace over conflict. They were there because Michael Jordan's actions had reminded them that, in the end, we are all part of something larger than ourselves. For Talia, it was an awakening. She saw the truth in Michael's words as they played in her mind, repeating over and over like a mantra. Support local, always. Form your own opinion. Don't let division control your choices. The crowd gathered outside the diner, eager to show their support, was proof that, sometimes, One small act of kindness can change the trajectory of a community, of a town, of a country. The impact on Melissa and the diner. As the crowd outside the Maple Grove Diner continued to grow, Melissa stood behind the counter, her mind spinning. She watched as people filed in, eager to sit, their excitement palpable. What had started as a quiet, nearly unnoticed morning was now a spectacle. The once quiet diner, where the clink of plates and the murmur of local conversation had been the usual soundtrack, was now alive with the chatter of strangers, people from out of town, and news cameras flashing in every corner. Melissa had always prided herself on running a tight ship, on being in control of the small world she had built in Oakwood. But this was something entirely beyond her. She had never anticipated that the simple act of turning Michael Jordan away would lead to something like this. She had made the decision based on what she believed was right, on what felt personal to her, and yet, now it was her actions, her decision, that had brought all this attention, and it wasn't the kind of attention she had expected. At first, there had been confusion, even anger. Melissa found herself questioning everything. Why would Michael Jordan, of all people, choose to turn the tables and make a post that essentially called for support of her diner? He could have easily done the opposite. He could have spread outrage, stirred up a storm that would have surely hurt the diner's reputation, and turned public opinion against her, but instead he had shown grace, forgiveness, and understanding. Melissa had spent her entire life in Oakwood, a small town where everyone knew each other's business. She had built the diner from the ground up, and it had become a place where the community came together. But what Michael had done, what his post had done, was far beyond a simple show of support. It had reminded her that the world, for all its divides and disagreements, still had room for kindness, and that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change everything. The rush of customers coming into the diner wasn't just about the food. It was about something much larger. It was about a moment where people had rallied behind a message of forgiveness and unity, a moment where Michael Jordan's unexpected act had restored a sense of faith in the power of human connection. As the day wore on and the diner filled with customers, Melissa stood quietly in the kitchen, her emotions mixed. Part of her was overwhelmed by the kindness being shown to her business, but another part of her still struggled to understand why Michael had chosen this path. Why hadn't he fought back? Why hadn't he used his influence to shame her? But as she stood there, watching the diner transform into something much larger than she had ever anticipated, a realization began to take root in her mind. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about understanding that sometimes, in order to heal a rift, one had to extend the hand of grace. Michael Jordan's decision to forgive, to rise above the conflict, had turned a moment of rejection into a powerful example of what it truly meant to be human. The diner was no longer just a place to grab a meal. It had become a symbol of what could happen when people chose understanding over division. And for Melissa, that realization would forever change the way she viewed not just her business, but her own role in this world. A lesson in kindness and forgiveness. As the morning wore on, Talia found herself reflecting on the events that had unfolded in the hours since Michael Jordan's rejection at the Maple Grove Diner. The once quiet, simple space had transformed into a whirlwind of activity and media attention. Yet, beneath all the noise, one undeniable truth began to surface. Michael's response had been more than just an act of grace. It had been a profound lesson in the power of kindness and forgiveness. Standing in the kitchen, watching the crowds of customers coming in and out, Talia couldn't shake the image of Michael's calm departure the night before. His quiet dignity in the face of rejection had left a deep impression on her, one that would stay with her long after the excitement of the morning faded. He hadn't chosen anger or revenge. He hadn't made a spectacle of his dismissal. Instead, Michael had chosen to walk away, to forgive, and to leave the door open for something better. And in doing so, he had shown the world that sometimes the greatest power lies not in winning a fight, but in choosing peace. For Talia, this was a revelation. She had grown up in a world where conflict seemed inevitable, where every disagreement had the potential to escalate into something ugly. She had seen it in the news, on social media, in her own personal relationships. In a world where voices were louder and anger was more easily shared than understanding, Michael Jordan had chosen to break the cycle. He hadn't allowed himself to be defined by the rejection he faced. Instead, he had used his influence for something greater, to show that kindness could change the course of a situation. As the day continued, Talia couldn't help but watch Melissa, who was now caught in the whirlwind of attention, still trying to reconcile her role in the events. She could see the mix of confusion and regret in her boss's eyes, the battle between her personal beliefs and the outpouring of support that had followed Michael's post. Melissa had expected backlash, hostility, perhaps even ridicule, but instead she was faced with the undeniable truth that Michael's kindness had turned everything around. The more Talia thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about the diner or the controversy over politics. This was about something far deeper, a call to look beyond our differences, to see each other not as opponents, but as fellow human beings, all capable of both making mistakes and offering forgiveness. In a world where divisions seemed to grow every day, Michael's actions had proven that kindness could be the bridge that connected us all. By the time the last customer left the diner that day, the air had shifted. The media frenzy had subsided, but the lesson Michael had imparted lingered. It was a lesson not just in how to handle rejection, but in how to live in a world that often seems driven by conflict. Michael Jordan had shown them all that there was strength in choosing kindness, that there was power in forgiving and moving forward. His simple decision to walk away with dignity had turned a small act into a life-changing moment for everyone involved. For Talia, the lesson was clear. Kindness was the true measure of strength, and forgiveness was the only way forward. What do you think? Could you choose kindness in the face of rejection, just like Michael Jordan did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share your own stories of forgiveness and understanding, because sometimes it's the simple acts of kindness that make the biggest difference. If you enjoyed this story and want more inspiring content, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us all of the power of choosing peace over conflict. Stay tuned for more, and remember, kindness is the key to changing the world.